I was just thinking as I heard John talking that I think that the King of Bhutan's comment is actually underappreciated. It's been very much turned into a call to measure something else, to measure things that GDP doesn't measure. But I think that kind of the offhand way he made it, he was saying that we should not lose ourselves in pursuit of the measurable. And John actually hinted at this also when he said leisure time. I mean, you could quantify that, but can you distinguish between leisure time spent watching television and leisure time spent, reading stories to your kids or taking care of a sick person or something like that? So I think that the change that we need here goes a lot deeper than merely shifting the things that we measure and trying to maximize GNH or GPI rather than GDP. Because in my life, at least, the things that make me feel rich are not something that I could quantify or put a number to. I was, well, maybe I'll list some of them. Some of the things that, I feel like these happiness indexes that rank the Scandinavian countries on top and maybe Costa Rica and Thailand close up to the top too. I think they're highly problematic. And the United States gets ranked quite high in those rankings as well, because they're so much based on our cultural conditioning, what the appropriate response is and what we compare ourselves to. So we have an ideology here that we should be happy because look how rich we are, look at all the stuff we have, and if you're not happy, you must have some kind of problem. You're a misfit of some sort. So I think that our reference point and our identity around happiness totally screw up those statistics. What makes me happy are definitely, the things that can't be measured. Intimacy, connection, the feeling of belonging, of being at home in the universe, having meaningful work, having an environment that is beautiful to me, hearing insects and birds. Like, that's a kind of wealth that you really can't quantify. And that's the kind of wealth that is increasingly absent in our culture. All of that's been taken away and replaced by the things that we can count and measure, commodities, and manufactured, standardized environments. Immersed in that poverty, of course, we seek more and more of whatever's available, more and more of the measurable to compensate for a loss of the infinite and the qualitative. But really, how much stuff do you have to own to compensate for the lack of intimacy, for the lack of connection? How much can assuage that feeling of not being at home in the universe? I was just at this festival in Costa Rica, and I was hanging out with a philosopher friend of mine. He actually is like a professor of philosophy who also goes to psychedelic festivals, which in itself is a hopeful sign. And we were like in the hotel then, like on our way back. This is a long and not that interesting story, but we found ourselves back in the normal environment of right angles, and standard objects and stuff. And we were like, are we crazy to think that this is normal? And that time outside, barefoot, with the sounds of the jungle, dancing, like howler monkeys were up in the trees above us. And I looked at those howler monkeys, and I pointed them out to Joshua, and I said, there's the struggle to survive, right there. They were lounging around all day, occasionally maybe going to look for some food, but we project our poverty onto the rest of life. and then use that projection to justify our economic system, which is always about running away from a scarcity that, objectively speaking, does not exist. It's not only our economic system that separates us from true wealth. And one thing I really appreciate about Helena's work is that she has gone so far beyond economics to talk about things like education, which offer people, not only do they take children away from that web of intimacy and connection, not only do they replace their the story that they had about every landform and every face in their community with essentially manufactured stories that we call history and literature and science. So not only does it cut them off from real wealth and convert that wealth into something measurable as scores on a test, but it also replaces their story of the world that was, of course, different everywhere on this planet, but had a common thread everywhere, replaces the story of the world that says we belong in a living universe, that we are not separate from the material world outside of ourselves, that the qualities of a self are not in human beings alone, but that we are with our brothers and sisters, that every animal, every plant, every landform, every hill, every mountain, every rock even. And again, I think Bayo probably talked about this because I saw him carrying a rock. But every rock has beingness. Like, that story makes us wealthy. And the ontology that is put upon us by our educational system, by our medical system, et cetera, cuts us off from that. So it's not only our economic system that, ironically enough, makes us poor. It's also our mythology, our ideology. And this is a condition that has reached an extreme in our time. And because it is becoming intolerable, it's, I would say, even birthing us into, first, the space between stories, which I talked about earlier, and then a new and ancient story where we reclaim true wealth and embrace these things that have that we've been cut off from. These fundamental needs that a human being has, to know and to be known, to explore the boundaries of your world. All of these things are ripe opportunities for business when you cut them off. You cut off the possibility of exploring the boundaries of your world, and then you can sell fake adventures, and tourist packages and casino packages and things like that. And it's using fake wealth to compensate for the loss of real wealth. But I want to go a little bit beyond reclaiming true wealth, because it's not only that this will make us richer in our experience of being, it also makes us more powerful as agents of change. And so I'll tell a little story about that. I hope it's not too airy-fairy. So I was in Taiwan just for a day. I used to live there. A piece of my heart is still in Taiwan. I was there just stopping by for a day, and my friend took me on a hike into the mountains right from the airport, right? Got off the airplane, we go into the mountains, we drive into this pretty remote area, and we start walking to see these sacred trees. There was a sacred grove up there, supposedly. And we walked and walked and walked, and I was speaking that afternoon in Taipei, and he's like, we should probably turn back soon. But I said, no, let's just go up this one last slope. It wasn't inviting, it was muddy, but we said, okay, let's go up to the top of that, and then we'll turn around, because who knows? And I got to the top, and there was a sign that said, you can do it 5 more minutes to the sacred grove. It felt like we passed this little threshold, There was a guardian at the threshold, and so with renewed energy, we went, and these trees were just astonishingly huge, like maybe 4, 5, 6 meters in diameter. I mean, just enormous, like redwood size, but not as tall, but just like these 2,000-year-old enormous beings that somehow escaped the logging that has happened over the whole country. And we were just in awe of these beings. And I asked my friend, I said, Philip, do you think they're mad at us because we've cut down all of their brothers and sisters, and there's only these 7 or 8 trees left? Do you think they're mad at us? And he said, no, they're very happy to see us. And in that moment, it rang true. I knew it was true, what he said. And it was so natural to even ask that question, which is arrant nonsense in the story of the world that has been offered to us in our schooling, in which they can't be mad or happy to see us. That's an anthropomorphic projection. They're just woody tissue. How could they have, we're projecting human emotions onto them. That's a delusion. But in that moment, it was the most natural thing in the world to ask that question. That child's knowing was at the fore. That has somehow survived my conditioning. And I'm very grateful for that. I think it's probably in everybody, even the most hardened Monsanto executive or timber company executive. Like, that's something that cannot die because it's fundamental to who we are. So not only did I feel very rich at that moment, feeling no longer alone in the universe, for that moment felt I have my companions here. Something else happened. Those trees imprinted themselves onto me because of the way that I saw them. And I became no longer Charles. I became Charles plus these trees. And the words that I spoke thereafter, that afternoon, and maybe to some extent even today, are coming from that imprint. The trees are speaking to you through me. Sometimes people ask, if the spirits of the land are really so powerful, how come they haven't done anything about this situation? And the answer sometimes is, well, they've been waiting to be asked. Well, guess what? To even ask them, you have to see them through those eyes as a being you could ask. And to really believe it, to really see them at that moment, to allow that childlike perception. If we as a species, as the dominant culture, saw nature even 10% with those eyes, we would no longer be able to do the things that we're doing to this planet. So I'm not talking about just a philosophy here. I'm talking about an activist strategy. If you can, through giving people experiences, through telling stories, if you can create that moment of perception, that will change who the perpetrators are. And it's not a trivial matter to do this. It could require a lot of courage and creativity. But it has an unstoppable effect. A guy wrote to me from Australia and described this anti-fracking campaign that they did. I think it was in New South Wales. And this was a number of years ago, and it wasn't going well. They'd done all these direct actions, chained themselves to the machinery, done this and that, and they had this big encampment, and they heard that the police were coming. 800 heavily armed police sent by the government, and the media were coming, and it was all going to be the usual narrative of the, wild-eyed, disgruntled, anti-scientific protesters who are in the way of progress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they knew that they could not win this battle. So they decided to do something completely different. They decided, we're just going to have a party here. They got out the didgeridoos, the clapping sticks. They made this huge art project visible from the air. They just had a party, and the Aborigines were a big part of this movement as well. And somehow that paralyzed the government. There was no precedent for disrupting an Aboriginal festival. And they could no longer see it through the lens that they had been seeing it through. It disrupted their story, in other words. And I won't say too much more about disrupting the story as a tactic for activism, but in the end, they prevailed. The fracking company itself was made the target of a government investigation for corruption, and they totally won that battle without knowing. This wasn't a strategy, though. They weren't saying, like, we're going to make them feel sorry, we're going to show them that we're just a celebration. Like, it was just kind of an upwelling of a celebratory impulse. And afterwards, one of the Aborigine women, one of the Aboriginal women told this, my friend, she said, because she was very moved, she said, usually the result of this would be how it's always been. All the black fellows would get arrested, some of the white fellows would get arrested too, and the project would go on. But this time, because you changed your vision and didn't see it through the eyes of conflict, it allowed the spirits of nature to operate through you. And when that happens, you cannot possibly lose. So I'll just end by saying that as we step into this new and ancient way of seeing, tremendous things are possible. We're going to do this thing, people.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. I'm honored to be sharing the stage with these wonderful human beings and to be sharing this weekend here with you. It's absolutely fantastic to be gathered here in Portland by the Willamette River. The Willamette, thank you. I want to be corrected again when I want to acknowledge the Indigenous people of this area who continue to live here. And once again, I turned to the internet as a source of information and learned that the Chinookan people, there are many different nations here, continue to live here. And I just want to acknowledge where we are gathered. My name is Severn Cullis-Suzuki. I'm from Canada. My mother is Tara Cullis. She was born in Wootton-under-Edge in Gloucestershire, England. She's an immigrant to Canada. My father is David Suzuki, a third-generation Japanese Canadian. His grandparents emigrated from Aichi Prefecture and from Kumamoto Prefecture. My sister is Sarika Cullis-Suzuki, and that is the culture that I come from is from my family, this very Canadian family. We're very proud of being Canadian. We take our responsibility as engaged citizens very seriously. We are an activist family, as some of you know, and we have learned a lot about what it means to take responsibility, what it means to take root from Indigenous peoples who've taken us in as family on the west coast of Canada. And so I titled my talk, Our Common Ground. Our Common Ground was the title of a group that my mother formed when I was in grade 4. Grade 4 in Canada is when you learn in your social studies class. This is when in Canadian public school curricula about First Nations or Indigenous people in Canada. And my parents had many friends in First Nations villages in British Columbia and across the country. And so growing up, I even by grade 4, I had already spent a lot of time with Kwakwaka'wakw people in Alert Bay, with Hiltsuk aunties and uncles in Bella Bella, and with Haida elders in Haida Gwaii. And even by that time, it had happened to me several times in my life. My sister and I were put to sleep on the benches of the great big house in Alert Bay during a potlatch so that my family, my parents could stay and continue to watch the ceremonies and the work that was done till 7 in the morning. The potlatch was already a deep part of my understanding of how some people conducted their business. And the potlatch, an incredible West Coast tradition in several different First Nations. Now, as an adult, I understand it is a radically different system of economics and distribution of wealth that continues to exist today. And for those of you who might not know of the potlatch, it's this incredible process of rising in a community's esteem by giving all your wealth away. And so a chief and his family and his clan will save up money for years, and then finally they will throw a potlatch. This could be 1, 2, 3 days long, which are feasts for their community with a lot of different interactions, important interactions like the transmission of names, of rights for different resources. And rights always is partnered extremely closely with responsibilities. Grand Chief Ed John says, everybody's talking about rights these days. We never used to talk about rights. We talked about responsibilities. And this is where the work is done publicly on the floor in the big house. And all of the people who are attending, all the people who are sitting around, they are paid by the chief and his clan, paid as witnesses to see, to remember the interactions that went on. And so at the end of these incredible nights where there is ceremony, where there's transactions, where there's performances, at the end of the night, a huge pile of gifts of wealth, physical, material wealth, will be piled high in the floor of the gymnasium or the longhouse or the big house, and it will all be given away. So in grade 4, I came home from school, and I told my mom what I'd been learning about. That I learned that there used to be Indigenous people that lived in British Columbia. And they used to do this thing called the potlatch, and they used to carve totem poles. They used to live in British Columbia and Canada. And so I came home and I just couldn't understand this. Like, why did these textbooks act like this was ancient history? I mean, this is happening today. This is, current. And so, I just told my mom about what I was learning. And my mother is, one of those competent people that believes in taking responsibility, and she's done this my whole life, just set about very practically about, what are we going to do about this? Well, we'll just start organizing. And she got her girlfriends together, and they formed Our Common Ground. Her girlfriends were Indigenous and non-Indigenous women, mothers, who got together and started brainstorming on how they could deal with this erasure of Indigenous peoples in the school system. And they started rewriting the textbooks. And then she organized for her friends who had a lot of Indigenous knowledge to come and speak in our school and talk to our social studies class. And she organized for her dear friend Vera Cranmer to come to our class and tell us about what it was like to be Kwakwakiwak and tell us about things like residential schools. Residential schools, for if you don't know, these were funded by the Canadian and the American governments, happened here as well, administered by the Catholic and Anglican churches of Canada. And this was a program from the late 1800s until very recent history. The last one closed in 1996 in Canada, where children were forcibly taken from their communities and put into these schools that were often very, very far away, like provinces and provinces away, and not allowed to practice their culture, not allowed to talk to one another in the language or to be with any siblings. They died in droves, and the graveyards behind the schools were filled. This experience had a big impression on me as a fourth grader. I learned two very important life lessons. I learned the first one that what you read in the textbooks isn't necessarily the truth. That was a very important lesson as a child. And the second, equally important, I learned that you can band together with your friends and you can change what's taught as the truth. Now, I wanted to get into so many issues here because this conference has truly brought up so many different aspects of something that is systematically wrong, which is our globalized economy, and the form that the way that the world has now become organized. But I wanted to zero in on the relationships between environmentalists and indigenous peoples. I've been branded an environmentalist my whole life. But truly, I feel like an advocate for intergenerational justice. This is something I feel really like an engaged citizen because I believe in social equity, I believe in social justice and democracy and all these good things. But I believe that we, and I'm saying we as in the environmental movement now, we really need a deep understanding of why Indigenous perspectives, worldviews, relationships to the world are absolutely fundamental to our achieving any sort of real harmony with this earth. And I was so inspired by Derek Rasmussen's presentation yesterday. It really struck me because he spoke to it. We all originally come from Indigenous societies. We all come from somewhere. Indigenous means, the word indigenous means originating or occurring naturally in a particular place. Well, guess what? Human beings are some of the natives of planet Earth. We are indigenous to this planet. We come from nowhere else. And even today, as we live in a completely dehumanized world, we still depend on air, water, the earth for providing our food, all of the food that we eat came from life. Even oil, even fossil fuels came from life millions of years ago. And even though we are denying these realities, we're denying it as hard as we can, as vigorously as we can, we are from this earth. Indigenous people are the ones that still today, by and large, have maintained the relationships with the earth that have allowed us to survive for millennia. The relationships include hard-earned protocols and rules for how to be a human being, how to conduct your culture, how to conduct your spirituality, how to conduct your resource management so that you won't eat up all your resources and be starving next winter, or in 10 winters, or in 100 winters. And I say hard-earned. Indigenous people, human beings, are not saints. It's not because people are noble savages that want to do good to other creatures. This is survival. This is hard-earned wisdom. There were droughts, there were famines, there were times when people harvested too much and people died. And that memory has been preserved and embedded in cultural practices. Today we have a monolithic, dehumanizing economic structure that dictates global culture. And we've done this in such a short time. It has precipitated a period that we are now living through, an incredible bottleneck of diversity. Diversity on all different levels. Diversity not just of economic systems, diversity also, of course, of biological creatures, and diversity of cultures and the ethnosphere. Indigenous peoples are the keepers of our identity as human beings, as natives of this planet. They are hanging on, and they are doing it for all of us. I don't think that we have a deep understanding of the dependency of our planet's ecological integrity and on Indigenous identity, Indigenous survival, Indigenous empowerment, Indigenous ideas. So we, as non-Indigenous people, we need to figure out, one, our own identities, and this is a big piece because we have lost who we are. We need to figure out our own identities as humans who come from an indigenous tradition somewhere. We all come from an indigenous place. And two, we need to figure out how to be allies with the connection holders. You know what? Scrap that. Allies implies politics, strategy, and negotiation. We've allowed ourselves as activists to become too deep into our different silos, to become professionalized, so we reach out and we say, I think we need to be strategic allies with that group. We have different niches we've institutionalized into. You know what? We have to figure out how to be more than allies. We need to figure out how to be friends. You know what? We need to figure out more than how to be friends. We need to figure out how to be family. Because that is what we are. Whether we like it or not, we are family. And this is our home. Thank you.
So I'd just like to quickly start by inviting us to think about our names. I met a guy yesterday with an interesting name. His name was Guy. And throughout my stay here in Portland, for the days I've been here, I've met people with interesting names. So I just want to invite you for a few seconds. Just think about your name, the strange configuration of letters that make your name. Just think about it for a moment. And then whisper it. Everyone, just whisper it. Whisper your name. Okay, shout your name. Okay. My name is Bayo. I'll be telling you a bit more about this as we go into names and what they mean in my culture. But what I want to do here is to take you through the portal of my own personal journeys, to share with you my reflections about what I think wants to emerge at this time, and what change means, and what wonder means, and what beauty means. And so, it's called an Oriki for localization. This past year, on an October afternoon, we carefully secured, that's my family, the last piece of furniture to our truck. We said a half-smiling goodbye to our house, and we drove away from our university home. We called that home Aurora, and my wife and I had lived in Aurora for a few years during our work as lecturers in the university. She had blessed us with so many gifts, so many treasures, and so many memories. We watched Alethea, our 1-year-old daughter, 1 year, 6 months, spit out her first maybe words in Aurora. We planted our first garden in Aurora. My wife is Indian, so we experiment with the Indian-Nigerian fusion, food in Aurora. In many ways, we were born in Aurora, but now it was time to say goodbye, perhaps for the very last time. As I drove away, careful to acknowledge the protests of the heap of books and the unwieldy furniture we had accumulated during our sojourn as academics, I started to think about what we were doing, and I recollected that I didn't quite have a name for that moment. Our colleagues did. Some thought that leaving the privileged positions we occupied in search of some kind of bohemian existence was a mistake. Our students and a few friends, they were quite sad to see us go, felt it was an inspiring thing that we were doing. My mother-in-law and my mother and our families of my wife's family, EJ, that's her name, our families wondered if we would earn just as much money as we had when we were lecturing. However, through the interstices of labels and behind the names people had contrived to understand our transition and to make sense of our movement from the university, we had a song. We had a queer kind of knowing that didn't quite lend itself to the logics and data. Where's Chet? about life or how life ought to be lived. We had something else, something wilder, something that would not be contained in the chaste and claustrophobic boundaries of an explanation. We had an Oriki. Where I come from, that's Western Nigeria, the Yoruba people say that names are very important. They tell stories. My name is Bayo. Everyone say Bayo. Yeah. It means I have met ease and softness, a claim my wife would gently repudiate. My other name, Akomolafe, which you did a good job at pronouncing, thank you so very much for that, means someone who teaches others the good life. But it wasn't until recent that I realized that I had a gift deeper than names could convey, more nuanced than a birth certificate could accommodate. And Oriki is a cultural spectacle among Yoruba people. It's a deep spiritual reckoning with entangled worlds, hidden histories, peeping ancestors, and roving essences. It is often embodied with praise poetry. It is said that one who doesn't know his Oriki or her Oriki has lost his spiritual song. Orikis are like names, and yet they're very much unlike names. Names are fixed, often brief and often embarrassing, especially if your parents find it fitting to call you Voldemort or something that should be a biological curiosity. If you happen upon a name materially reconfigured and embodied, it might look like a red spot in an ocean of white, tame and unassuming, serving to identify a location, to mark a spot. An Oriki, on the other hand, would look like fire, not a cultivated bonfire, but a wild, uncircumscribable harlot with golden hues as plumage, pulling in the sun, the sky, and the soil into a dancing fury. To evoke an Oriki is to wander after the essence of a recipient, to be in the moment while weaving a tapestry of adoration that might include dance and song, poetry, and even gift-giving. It is a name without alphabets, the wonder beneath it all, names made keener. So when last year a feisty Yoruba woman and an academic colleague, bemused by the name that we had given our daughter, Alethea Anya, which is Greek and Hebrew at the same time, asked me if I had an Oriki for my daughter, I didn't know what to say. I was thoroughly educated, remind you. But it made me wonder if beyond names and labels, beyond the neurotic rituals of language, beyond our best tools and analysis, there was an Oriki for the times of upheaval and awakening that we are in right now. And so Margaret Weitheim, I hope I pronounced that well, in her recent article, The Limits of Physics, reminds us that all languages parse the world into categories, but not every aspect of our experiences fits neatly into those categories. While some cultures learn to respect ambiguities and definitional monstrosities as critical to the continuance of such cultures, other collectivities become obsessed with ever finer levels of categorization as they try to rid themselves of those ambiguities. For such societies, a kind of neurosis ensues as the project of categorization takes more and more mental space and energy. Today, we're witnessing this kind of exhausting anxiety as we reach the end of our tethers, as dominant myths and single stories about what it means to be alive and what it means to be in the world, as they crumble and they wither away, as climate change reminds us that we're not lords and masters of the universe, as the growth paradigm reinforces the techno-consumerist empire of multinationals, devastated ecosystems, and dwindling diversities, as education so-called, which my brother speaks so eloquently about, Manish, as education so-called strips from us our sincerest questions and our deepest songs, as nation-states and representational politics teach us that we cannot hope in the status quo, and as prosperity and happiness promised by compliance to industrial society hollows out, we are faced, as it were, with questions about what a more beautiful world could actually look like and what we can do to make it real for us and our children. In an effort to make sense of all today's unfolding anomalies, many insist that today's challenge is actually about us versus them. It's between us who are awakening and those who are still asleep in the matrix. It's between the 99% and the 1%. It's between justice and injustice. It's between the North and the South. It's between the modern and the pre-modern. It's between the new story and the old story. Most of us that will speak during this conference have strong and justifiable reasons to frame today's chaotic changes as tensions between a world imprisoned by a techno-economic ideology of growth, of exploitative trade treaties and markets, and a planet yearning to be healed by human-scaled economies, regulated banks, and renewed connections between nature and culture. However, and I can attest to this, I've been doing a lot of traveling lately, around the world in puddles of conferences and on-conferences, in symposiums and summits, in hotel rooms and school halls filled with activists whose faces bear telltale signs of despair and failure. We are pushing our linguistic powers to an extreme. We're coming up with ever new ways of modeling how change really happens, but we seem not to be seeing the change that we hope for. We're inventing new categories of thought. We're tasking our volition storehouses and seeking smarter ways to rouse people to their feet and to the urgencies of the hour. We're urging ourselves to be practical, to focus on the facts, the real stuff, ma'am. But as our language gets more and more sophisticated, the more distant it seems a more beautiful world gets. Our increasing sophistication betrays our deepest anxieties about a universe that will not be comprehended, a cosmos that will not be summed up in a single theory. So what all this means for me, and this is my reflection, is that we don't know. We do not know how to resolve our current crisis, how to bring about a more beautiful world. We cannot tell with absolute certainty whether strategy is preferable to being in the moment, or whether the North and South should indeed work together, or what it means to have a paradigm shift happen. It is perhaps unresolvable in principle. We do not understand why we live in a world like this, why a monolith rises and rises, its shadows graying our clouds and piercing our soils. And even though we have incredible conceptual and critical tools, we do not know how to come out of it, out of this mess we're in, or even if coming out of it is the right question. It seems that the more we try to transcend the system, the more we behave like it. Our uncertainty doesn't exist because of a lack of evidence or a poor articulation or a lack of economic of happiness conferences. Much to the contrary, the more we probe the furthest reaches of inner and outer space, the more we realize how entangled we are with the problems we strive to get rid of, with the other we hope to save, with the systems we seek to switch off, and with the incomprehensible. But what if our knowing, and this is my question for the moment, what if our knowing is our greatest asset yet? What if not knowing is a resource that we've not come to terms with? What if our journeys truly begin when we do not know where we're going? What if, like interstellar travelers in search of a home, our deepest feelings, the fluffy stuff, we usually do away with, are just as important, just as real, and even more so than our best statistics and our most practical insights? Could it be that even the smallest actions count in ways our system change dynamics are blind to? What if we could treat the unknown, the unthinkable, beyond data as a resource instead of an inconvenience? Many elders from indigenous non-Western cultures spoke about this and still speak about this. They urged us to slow down in times of urgency. They urged us to be at peace when we're lost, for it is then that other paths are noticed. They told us that the dark makes everything possible. What they meant, I think, is that we need a change of awareness, not a change of speed. in order to happen upon new and brighter days. The test was to see how entangled everything was and how nothing stands alone. In a poetic sense, they might have said, let us stop pretending to be humans and dissolve into mother tree and into clouds and rock and fish. Perhaps if some of those elders were to address mainstream activism today, with all our models and data sets and compelling theories and ideological divides, they would say that conventional activism valiantly attempts to address what only the whole can do, what only a network of entangled intelligences can even begin to comprehend, and that by moving towards that which cannot even fit our data, what might probably be called magic, we recognize not only our worlds anew, we recognize ourselves again. So the elders would urge a keener sensitivity. They would call for an Oriki. I wish I could do an Oriki for you, but there's no time for that. And I offer one today. I offer an Oriki today, in English though. That behind the names we give to our crisis and the names we give to the proposed solutions to these crises, behind our most fervent ideals, behind the most pragmatic concerns, there is a magic afoot. And the cosmos is mattering and unfurling in ways that weave together our discontent, our failures, our ignorance, our incoherence, our bumbling inadequacies, our victories, and our contradictions. It all matters. And we see this magic at the edges of our linguistic systems, where causal relationships no longer adequately account for change, where agency and will and awareness aren't individual attributes swaddled in gray matter, but breathing in stone, in rock, fountain, in yawning sun and teenage moon. We're collectively being ushered to a very strange place, brothers and sisters, one which obstinately refuses the characteristic features of location or fixity or dimension or logical convenience. We cannot navigate our way there. We cannot increase our speed. Our old categories of thought and imperatives, such as cause, time, effect, agency, direction, movement, and justice, are no more useful, any more than cardinal points are useful in outer space. The citri is coming undone. The Gordian knot is stretching out, and the rich tapestry of symbols and myth by which awareness was studiously guided, by which we thought ourselves more righteous, is becoming threadbare. And the great challenge of humanity, if there ever was or ever will be such a thing as humanity, is to embrace the unthinkable, to move towards the anomalous, where a pregnant nothing swirls. Today, I celebrate the great and persistent work of amazing people here and voices across the planet, the utility of bold notions like localization, of which I'm a strong proponent, and their subversive presence in the world. I recognize the turbulence in our conversations about how to bring change and the riddles that are thrown up every time we consider competing worldviews and what they have to say about our times, who we are, and what we have at our disposal. I honor our furious intentions to rid the world of exploitative ideologies. I honor our anger, our despair, and our furrowed eyebrows. I honor our victories as well, however short-lived they may be. I make no claim that all these have some kind of ontological meaning deeper than experience itself. I merely urge us to see the wilder connections, the deeper entanglements, and to perhaps learn to trust our deepest feelings, even though they defy conceptualization. So remember, if you can, the miracles in your life. The first smile of your firstborn child, the smile that pierces the sky. Remember how you felt knowing you are loved by another person, how undeserving you often feel of another's affections and attention. Does this matter? I think it does. Remember the gift of food, the textures that have no names, and the sprightly bursts of color and life where soulful meals are shared with friends. Remember the ones that have broken through the veil, and walked into the blaze of the distant sunset. Remember their parting words, their fragile grip, and their closing eyes. Think of how you feel knowing that 300 girls, none of whom you know, are still missing 300 days after they were kidnapped from their beds in a Nigerian school by men with trucks and guns. Think of what you'd give to have them return to their families. What I say today is that we live in Orikis, in colors awash with fragrance and memory and longing, in textures, in grief tinged with satisfaction, in joy stitched with pain, in shadows and light, in tears in spite, in moments that will not be named. And it is to this place, it is in this place that we must bring the change, not in ideological abstractions or data sets. Our feelings may not have any utility, any practical worth outside the city square where the concepts or where the contests between concepts and labels play out. But that doesn't mean or make them any less real or valuable. And perhaps recognizing this and resting in this peace is our deepest challenge as a culture. In the words of Alice Fulton, we have to meet the universe halfway. Nothing will unfold for us unless we move towards that which looks to us like nothing. Faith is a cascade. Our deepest challenge today is to transcend not only the fear that we are alone and we have to figure this thing out ourselves and that we're not doing enough, but the fear that if we do not do, nothing matters. We must, and I use must with some hesitation, we must trust that things count even when they don't add up. Should we let go of our insights or fall into some self-indulgent hope? Hoping that things unravel in ways we expect them to. Thus, pointing to a deeper place, a subterranean stream beneath the surface, mean that we should not speak out about fracking or GMOs or mining. Is this another postmodern attempt to reduce everything to language and to say that the world isn't real or everything is magic and trust? Or that we shouldn't speak out against TTIP? Am I attempting some kind of reductionism with blue sky illusions? Will any of that save the day, really? I don't know. But I don't think that our concerns with justice and the objects of these concerns I think that our concerns with justice, and the objects of these concerns are very real, but I suspect that it would be a mistake to take as less real the ideas that our best data may no longer be enough, and that the insight that is our culture, our ways of making meaning, is in crisis. I say to you today that I think that our ways of responding to crisis is part of the crisis. So let us get involved. Let us turn inward. Let us localize and do all in our power to call out the insidious activities of a global corporatocracy. But let us do so knowing that what seeks to emerge, what wants to come about, will not necessarily lie at the end of our genius or at the tips of our sophistication or agendas. We can no longer conveniently brush away the idea that our toughest attempt to adequately represent the world in terms of social justice is occasioned by the very condition that the world is produced from, and that what is seeking to emerge is too promiscuous to be faithful to our efforts alone. So this is the Oriki of our times in conclusion, the subtle energies calling for us to think deeper. This is the hidden motif we cannot yet understand, the emblem that is beaten into the monolith that guards the gates of the unknown country that we're wading towards. This is the song we heard on that solemn October day as we left the campus to frame a life of our own. I remember turning to EJ, and she turned to me. We turned to each other. And as our truck passed the university gates, she said, "We are going home." And I knew with a knowing that is true and powerful that it was so. Thank you very much.
In every corner of the world, we are being pressured by a monoculture, a global consumer monoculture. It is being pushed by our governments who have a blind idea of growth and development.
The promise of development and progress is starting to crack. The issues facing us are connected to a common global economic system. All of our people are being squeezed every day by that. And all of our imaginations are being colonized by that system.
What we need is not scaling up of those solutions, but scaling out of those solutions, replication in millions of these variety of solutions, innovative solutions that are emerging. It's quite possible.
What we need to do is to actually create platforms in which these sorts of initiatives are able to get together, are able to synergize, are able to actually build those larger narratives, are able to begin to change the public discourse.
We're trying to create an alliance, an international alliance for localization, because we need a united no, one giant no to a continuation of that system. And at the same time, we need to see ourselves as actually part of an enormous movement involving hundreds of millions of people that are saying many yeses to diverse ecosystems, diverse cultures, diverse identities. This is about reclaiming our right to be who we are in our different ways of being. It's about reclaiming the diversity that is life.